This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. Jonathan Bennett and I had a great conversation with Evan Prodromou, the father of ActivityPub, which is behind Mastodon and all kinds of actual social networks, not the things they call social networks, but kinds that are really social, and they're growing. This is an open source movement that's happening in live time, is truly social, is really interesting, and Evan is an awesome guest. You have to listen to it or watch it. That is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 759, recorded Wednesday, November 29th, 2023. ActivityPub crawl.
Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club TWiT. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club TWiT Discord, a great clubhouse for TWiT listeners. And finally, the TWiT Plus feed with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit. And thanks for your support.
Hello again, everyone, everywhere. This is FLOSS Weekly. I am Doc Searls, and this week I am joined by Jonathan Bennett himself. Today, you're really small on my screen, so either you're wearing a white jacket or no jacket at all. Is that
it's a white jacket. It's
a white jacket. It's a formal.
No. Think more like Panama Jack style white jacket rather than James Bond tuxedo style white jacket. Like two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Oh yeah, it's a great look. But I think it's a first. I've always seen you with the dark jacket, which I tried to imitate, but all I could find is a dark shirt where I am right now.
If you hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, it's just actually I just saw the Stop Making Sense concert film again after 30 years or something like that. There's a scene in it where David Byrne has this giant suit that he can move around in and wiggles around on the stage. It's pretty, and I feel like I'm looking at that a little bit.
Yeah.
My shoulders are not that wide. So our guest this morning is a returnee, which I did not know until he told me, from our 37th back in 2008, which means we go back at least to 2008 or 2007, I guess.
Yes.
Evan Prodromou, who I know through StatusNet and some of the other many things that he's done in the past. Are you up on his work? You done your homework on this?
So I have paid attention to ActivityPub and the whole fediverse for a long time.
Yeah.
I think it's just the coolest concept. Let's take all the neat things about Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all those services that people use, but set the data free and let people bring their own server. It's the coolest thing.
I know it's funny to see that once again. His time has come or almost come.
Right. Right.
So let me bring him in. Evan Prodromou. I'm gonna go down a list here. He's got his signature must be gigantic. In addition to being like an open source geek from all the way back, he created the Wiki Travel open source travel guide, now Wiki Voyage. Creator of StatusNet software, now GNU Social, which went to identity.ca, a social networking site that competed with and was in many ways better than Twitter back in the early stages of that. It was a real landmark effort. I think that's when I started to know him, is around that. Co-creator of ActivityPub, the protocol that runs Mastodon and the whole fediverse now, which is a pretty big deal. Director of Open Technology at the OpenEarth Foundation, author of an upcoming book on ActivityPub for O'Reilly. From San Francisco, now lives in Montreal, but coming to us from London in a room that looks like the fog machines must be running. So Evan, welcome to the show, man.
Doc, thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry about my spooky lighting, but hopefully it sets a nice tone. So I am on the road right now. I realize that that's a little bit tricky, but I'm glad that I was able to join.
I know. I like how we go on the road. I'm on the road a lot too, but it's rarely the road; it's the air. I fly between these places. So, but I don't know where to begin with this. But I think I first met you. You probably were at an IW early on,
yes,
or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and I was on Identica, and to follow what you're doing with StatusNet back then. What happened? Where is this? Are they still around in some way, or is it all morphed into ActivityPub based stuff now? What's that transition?
Super great question. So the software that ran Identica. So again, we're picking up the sequel of my episode 37, I think. So we'll start there, which happened about the time that Identica and StatusNet were launching. That was a time of a lot of hope and optimism. We've been through kind of a trough of pessimism and then back to the world of optimism right now. Long story short, Identica is still around. It's running a new piece of software, like 2014 piece of software called Pump.io. Basically what happened is StatusNet started, Identica was running StatusNet. I moved it to Pump.io. Pump.io became the basis of ActivityPub. So the Pump.io API and protocol is what ActivityPub is now. Unfortunately, I and the other maintainers have never gone back to actually make Pump.io compatible with modern ActivityPub. So it's still kind of in the dead end. It is on my list of projects to get to. But Identica is a little off the fediverse right now, but it'll be back soon. We'll get to it soon. I'm thinking in decades here.
I just have to say, I feel so deeply that idea of, it's on the list of projects to get to somewhere eventually. It's a long list. I feel that so much.
I feel like I've got a long list. I kind of, talking about this issue of having distributed social networks, we had kind of a first wave around 2010, and we had a lot of innovation happening. StatusNet is a good example, but there were a number of other projects, Diaspora. We had some informal cooperation, but we never really got to like, hey, can we all work on a single standard? By the mid 2010s, the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, the folks who do web standards like HTML and CSS, stepped in to say, it's time for us to have a social networking standard, and brought together a whole bunch of people from different open source projects as well as commercial projects to develop ActivityPub. ActivityPub launched in 2018, I want to say, about the same time as Mastodon. Mastodon picked up, and it's really been the flagship software for ActivityPub. A lot of people talk about the Mastodon network when they really mean the Fediverse, but we mix them up a little bit. This kind of second incarnation seems to be doing really well. I'm pretty excited about where we are.
Now, just so everybody's on the same page, let's just assume that there are some folks that haven't watched the previous show and maybe don't know what we're talking about, what the Fediverse is, what ActivityPub has to do with it. And, they've heard about that Mastodon thing, but they don't have an account there yet. Give us a 30,000 foot view. What does this set of technologies let somebody accomplish? And what's so cool about it? What's the juice that's worth the squeeze?
Well, I like that.
Got to shout out Sean, one of our co-hosts, likes that particular turn of phrase, and I picked it up from him. Go ahead.
A lot of us have this experience from using commercial social networks like Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, where we'll say something like, Jonathan, I think you should really see this cool video on TikTok. And you say something like, oh, I'm not on TikTok yet, or I decided not to keep an account there. I'm on Instagram. And it's like, well, you can't get that content on Instagram unless somebody copies it over, which actually happens quite a bit. But this idea of like, my grandma is on Facebook, my senator is on Twitter, all my friends are on Instagram and my kids are on TikTok. And I have to maintain an account in each of those places in order to interact with the people and the content. The idea of federated social networks is to say, you should be able to kind of stake out a home in a social network and stay there and connect to people on other networks and see content from other networks. So the federated part is taking separate networks and being able to have content or personal relationships that cross the borders between the networks.
Okay. Now I'm kind of curious, like what's the back end all of this runs on? Are we talking about PHP code? Has everything been redone in Node.js? Is it full of Ruby on Rails developers? What does that ecosystem look like?
So the structure that we currently have now, so I'm talking 2023, there are on the order of 20 popular fediverse social networking services, right? Or servers, open source projects like PixelFed or Mastodon, Pleroma. There's a couple dozen of them for setting up social networks, depending on your needs for your community. Typically, people will set one up for a community that has an affinity around an interest or geographical affinity, a group of friends. I have one for my family, so my kids and my wife and me. And this gives us a way to kind of set up a little server that we can use for communication among ourselves, but we can also connect to other servers across the Fediverse. So Mastodon.social is a great example. It's one of the biggest networks on the Fediverse. But from my server at cosocial.ca, which is where where I do most of my participation, I can connect to people on Mastodon.social. People on Mastodon.social can connect to TWiT.social, etc. So we have a lot of backend code working there. Most of the code, so Mastodon is Ruby on Rails with a little bit of Node.js thrown in, I think. Pleroma is written in Elixir, which is kind of a cool, functional language. GNU Social, which is also on the Fediverse, is PHP. WordPress has a plugin for connecting to the Fediverse, so you can publish blog posts and they go out into the Fediverse, and that's also PHP, like the rest of WordPress.
So ActivityPub is just this kind of open standard with some things defined in it. You can bring whatever language you want to it. I like that. That's the best. That's the way to do it.
Absolutely it. That's absolutely it. So the way that ActivityPub works, it's got two main parts. The first part is that we have a standard for JSON objects that defines some of the important activities that happen in a social network. So things like creating a tweet, liking someone's image, updating your profile picture, things like that. We have a standard set of activities that you can use for communicating this information. And then the second part is that we have an HTTP based protocol for transferring these activities between servers. So if I post a new note, in Twitter, you would say tweet. In Mastodon, they say toot, like a elephant's trunk. I say
don't think
note.
is that still a thing? Is it still toots on Mastodon? Because that was kind of a troll thing way back in the beginning. I want to say one of the guys tried to step back from that.
Eugen has changed it, and it's now Eugen Roshko, who's the lead developer and CEO of Mastodon. He took it so it no longer, when you had the little button, doesn't say toot, it says publish. But old timers still call them toots, so I still call them toots. I like that term. But that information packet that says Evan posted a note gets transferred out to all the servers of people who follow me, and then it's delivered to those users through their web interface or through a mobile interface. So there's like a client to server aspect of ActivityPub and then a server to server aspect. Right. Old timers or old internet hands will recognize this topology as being very similar to how email works, right? So we have a protocol for interacting with your mailbox on your mail server, downloading your latest messages, uploading, sending out messages. And then there's another related but not exactly the same protocol for sending a message from your mail server to another mail server.
Okay, so I feel like you've just opened Pandora's box. If it's similar to mail, what is to stop us from seeing the same spam problem in ActivityPub that has basically killed email today?
That's such a good question. I think it's a really interesting thing to have come up. One is that we have way better tools today than we did in say the early 2000s when spam was really like digging into email. And we do have like great filters. We have spent like 20 years training spam filters on email spam. So we're doing pretty well on the social web. I think there's also the fact that you can do better filtering based on more contextual information, right? Is this a reply to something that I posted? Tell me about the image. Is it an image that I recognize? Is this someone I have a connection with, which is not something that we really have a sense of in email? Or is this someone connecting with me who is a friend of a friend of someone I know? So we have a lot of social signals, kind of deeper information that makes social contacts somewhat better for training and rules than email is. But it's let me just say has not been a problem so far for spam as much. Where it's been a bit of a problem is, you see those situations on, say, Twitter, where someone makes a post and it gets very unpopular, and there are like hundreds of thousands of, attack messages. You're an idiot. I hate you, etc. It is, on Twitter, you have to kind of wait for Twitter's trust and safety team to figure out how to fix that problem, and they don't always come to the rescue in time. One of the great things about the Fediverse is that role of managing user behavior, moderation is kind of distributed among the servers. So my server, your server, the TWiT social server, we're all the admins there are kind of taking care of that work to keep the Fediverse a little bit safer and more friendly. And it's notably different than on commercial social networks. You do see a lot better level of conversation, less abuse, etc.
That is something that I would love to dig into with you. There is another question I want to ask first, and then I think Doc's going to pick it up. And that is, speaking specifically of Mastodon, although this could apply to other clients, other connections to the Fediverse.
Yeah.
Is anybody making money from this yet? So are there any Mastodon instances where people are running ads beside the real content? Has somebody come along and commercialized this?
So let me give an example right now of the server that I use. It's called cosocial.ca, and it's actually a cooperative. So we all the members have a co-ownership in it. We pay annual dues, and that pays for the server, and that keeps things running. And it's only available for Canadians, unfortunately, so not everyone can join because of our co-op laws. But it's a great way for us to make sure that the server is always running. We have great income that's keeping things going, and it's really a nice system for doing that. There are some servers that have advertisement advertising support, the advertising tends to be a little bit different, right? So it tends to be display ads built into the web UI rather than in-stream ads. And the main reason is that those in-stream ads are really easy to filter out. So it's less effective as an advertising mechanism. The other thing you see for advertising on the Fediverse is you'll see some sponsored posts. So someone will say, this is a sponsored post. I tried this, electronic doodad, and I got it free, hashtag sponsored. So that's another place where you'll see some advertising happening on the Fediverse.
Boy, I have so many thoughts about this and so many questions to ask. And I want to go deeper into the business thing.
Great.
And I want to, not at length, but a couple of thoughts about it. And also matters of permanence. And also what can only the big guys do and what can only the little guys like us do. But we'll get into all of that right after this break. Okay, so first on business, Scott Galloway, who has a great podcast with Kara Swisher called, I hate to promote something that's like one of the biggest podcasts in the world. We've got one too, but he said something I think is important about the news business, which is it's not a very good big business anymore. It's a small business. If you're going to do, he didn't go that far with it, but that's where I'm going with it, which is, you can have a good small business in a nail salon, a barbershop, whatever. And I suspect that the businesses we're talking about in the Fediverse are going to be of that kind, rather than you have one big centralizer in the middle of it with a lot of responsibilities, which is what we had and with Twitter, have to a lesser extent with X, and have to a massively dysfunctional extent with Facebook, especially with their recent revelations that they knew everything about how they were bad for kids, but did it anyway. So I'm wondering if you're looking at it that way, like, hey, small business is good. There are some small businesses to be had in here. There are also ones that aren't a business. Like I on my blog, which I've had forever, never had any advertising. I always made money because of the blog, not with the blog. And that's been the case with open source for the duration. You make money because of open source. You don't make money with open source as much. If you're Red Hat, you get some of that, but even there it's compromised, right? So is that much of a thought as the work on the Fediverse has proceeded? Has that been in your mind at all as a strategy even, or just as an outcome?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that often happens for me when I talk about the Fediverse is like I get kind of put on the spot to invent good business models for people. And I'm like, look, if I had really good ideas for business models, I would do them myself and I would make a lot of money and I would pay someone to come on podcasts for me instead of going on them myself. So I don't always have great ideas, but I can say that the combination of open source software and open protocols plus federation gives us a lot of like hosting services similar to the way that you see like WordPress hosting, right? So like Mass.to is a great Mastodon hosting service where you can go, and I think it's like less than $10 a month, and don't quote me on that, to have your own Mastodon server that's running on their network, and they make sure you have backups and they do all that stuff, right? And I think that's a great business, right? People have done great businesses doing like cPanel hosting. And I think there's a lot of like opportunity for hosting on the Fediverse as a business. It's not a scalable business. It's a business where you're doing like some pretty reasonable margins, but you can do a good business that way. I think that there are also going to be another thing that's important is very few of us think, almost every business has an email domain and we provide email to our employees, but we don't really think of it as a key part of the way we make money in our business, right? Occasionally, if we have a newsletter or something like that, but we don't think about our employees like sending email to their colleagues in other companies as a money making process, even though it's really essential to that business. I think similarly, so for example, my day job at the OpenEarth Foundation, we have a Mastodon instance, social.openearth.org, where people can follow us, follow along with the work that we do. It's not a money maker, but it's a way for us to connect, right? I think that there are some cool options for other ways to make money with the fediverse. There are a few clients that are paid clients on like iOS and Android, where they're like $8.99 in the marketplace, and they're great fediverse clients that way. I think one of the things that happens when you have open source and you have open standards is you tend to go towards commodity pricing, which for customers like us is awesome. You get great technology for, a really competitive price.
I want to ask about permanence and archiving, but frame it in, and I want to bridge to that by noting that we had Matt Mullenweg on here several months ago from WordPress, and he and they have done a pretty good job of taking something that is an open standard, an open source body of code with WordPress, and made a business out of it. But they actually, and I want to give hats off to them, went out of their way when Harvard shut down the server where I had my blog for a long time, worked with Harvard to make sure that there were no 404s. Everything now went from a URL at Harvard to one that is doc.searls.com, which is my own, which is of course hosted somewhere. And they're doing the hosting, which is nice of them. And they have that service. It's a paid service. But also, really we're very respectful of that. I have no faith whatsoever that Twitter, I've often downloaded what I've written on Twitter as often as I can, but I have no faith that in the long run that stuff is going to last. Same goes for Facebook. Searches for old stuff on Facebook can often go nowhere. I'm wondering about, you talked about email, and I thought that was a really good point, that the mental model we have for email, which is I'm on a bunch of lists, right? But I also have personal email. It's all archived here. I've got it on my, at least if it's mine, I suppose at Gmail, which most people are on, it's a little different, but it's still theirs. Yours as a person, you have a sense of that. But my email at searls.com is while it's IMAP and it's hosted by Hover, it's also something I have a copy of, and it's on my computer here, and it goes back to 1995, and I've got that. And I'm wondering if there's a similar thing going on with all, on the one hand, I'm seeing all these posts on other Mastodon instances on my two. One is the TWiT one, and the one's one for journalists called journa.host.
Journa.host, good one.
Yeah. But I don't know if Mastodon.rando out there goes out of business and goes away. Does everything I saw there persist in any form? I have no idea about that.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you the kind of good news and the bad news on this. So the good news is that we have really robust systems for keeping your identity related to a domain. So if you have, social.searls.example, for example, you've got a domain that you use. If your server goes down, you just bring up another Mastodon instance on another server, point the domain there. Things are just hunky-dory. They just keep going, right? Restore your backup and you're ready to go. So that's a really nice aspect of this at that layer, right? And you can even do it somewhat with different implementations of ActivityPub. Like some of the ActivityPub implementations will take a Mastodon backup and restore it into their own database. Also really nice. You just move the domain and you're there. The problem is when you're using, so you mentioned JournaHost, you're using someone else's domain. If JournaHost decided to go out of business or change the way that they work in a way that you didn't like, there is neat. I should probably stop gesturing. I just got the iOS gestures. I'll stop being so interesting on camera. So one thing that we do have on the network on ActivityPub is that you can move from one host to another host, right? So you tell everyone in your network automatically, of course, Evan at old server is now Evan at new server. Follow me over there, and they will automatically follow you. So it's a very smooth transition that happens. What doesn't happen is not all of your data moves over with you. So your images and notes and things like that. So your social connections move, but not your data. It's a really important part of people feeling like they've got control over their systems. The original way that we kind of designed this was to have individuals running their own family servers or company servers or university servers. What's actually turned out to be the way that the fediverse is mostly spread around topologically is that there's a lot of volunteers who are running their own servers, and they let other people kind of use those servers, and that's not a very permanent structure. So we need to have a better way for people to move from one server to another. It's okay right now. We have data portability is a big part of what we're working on at the W3C right now.
So I'm curious about something. Does the Internet Archive, that's one of the places a lot of us go to try to find that old content. Does the Internet Archive have any visibility into ActivityPub applications? So, just again, Mastodon, because it's the most popular. Do some of those Mastodon feeds get scraped and archived there? And we can follow that up by talking about things that happen on places like Twitter, where tweets from 10 years ago get brought back up. It's like, you had this terrible take 10 years ago. You're still a terrible person, aren't you? That sort of thing happens all the time. Maybe there's a bigger question about whether it's a good thing that the internet never forgets.
So I will give a couple of Weasley answers there, right? My first Weasley answer is that Internet Archive has its own Mastodon instance. So I'm tempted to go start asking the people from Internet Archive to comment on this.
Sure.
So they've been very active in kind of the Fediverse community. That's the first thing that I think it's mastodon.archive.org. The second thing is that I know that they are doing archiving at that web page level, right? So they get a snapshot of a web page that has a toot on it or a conversation on it, and that does get backed up. And it gets backed up in the same way other websites are. There's a little bit of like technicalities, like Mastodon users can set a flag to say, don't archive my page, and Internet Archive will respect that. In general, though, those conversations are getting archived. What I don't know is if they're doing protocol level archiving. Like I talked about those little JSON packets, and it's possible to get a public feed of all the packets coming out, all the public packets coming out of a server. I don't know if Internet Archive is keyed into that and doing archiving of that. I hope they are. I kind of want to talk to them about it because it would be a good idea to do. If they're not doing it, I want to do it.
There's a lot of potential there. Because so one of the things that comes to mind is on Twitter. I jokingly talked about people and their bad takes from 10 years ago, but there's also been some things that have happened even like government officials have made statements on Twitter and then come back later and tried to claim the exact opposite. And so there is sort of this sport of getting the receipts. And, for individual people, maybe that's not great, or maybe it is. I don't know. I haven't thought through that all the way. But particularly for like official accounts, I think that is a pretty important thing to be able to do. I don't know. There's definitely an interesting kind of counterplay of things that might be important about that idea.
One of the things that's really important for like GDPR, which is the privacy regulations in Europe, is that right to be forgotten. I made a mistake. I posted something I didn't want to, and I'd like it to just disappear from the internet. And there are like ways to do that. If you're in control of a website, you can, put some flags onto a site that says, hey, this is no longer available. If you have copies of this, get rid of it. We have that option within ActivityPub. So when you delete something, that information goes out everywhere and it gets deleted from everywhere. And so I guess the question would be like, how good is archive.org at managing those? And I know that they're pretty good at it. They've been pretty respectful of people's needs for deletion. I think the hard part is that on Twitter, for example, they've got 200 million users. They're not going to, advocate for you if you do a deletion versus like running your own server. You have a much more control.
All right. So Doc is whispering in my ear that while we could talk about ActivityPub the whole time, we probably shouldn't. Doc, you want to pick it up and ask about one of these others?
Yeah. So we can pick up. Actually, I want to go a little bit further with this thread.
Great.
Not so much with ActivityPub, but with something I sort of mentioned earlier, and I think it's an important question. What is it that only the big guys can do? And I think we have a possible answer with what happened to email, in that nobody does a better job of spam filtration than Google. That's just the case. I mean, I don't use Google, and the service I use is good at it, but there's still a lot of false positives and stuff. And I mean, some things. I mean, a reporter will want to go on Twitter and see what's happening on Twitter. Can they go onto the fediverse? Not exactly. They have. It again is kind of like, are they in a circle where they're going to get the information they want? And there's a lot of greenfielding that can happen there. I think that's sort of what I was looking for with Journo.host, and in a way is where do journalists get their information when they can't go to a centralized thing and have a list, for example, and only follow that list. I mean, I've got hundreds of journalists on my Twitter/X list, which I don't look at them much anymore because I don't go to Twitter that much anymore. But Journo.host is not that yet. Yeah, it could be. Yeah. It could be, and it's part of it is mental modeling, and part of it is just architectural. And what do we need? What can only the big guys do? And that isn't bad. I mean, you can say, "Geez, Apple's really great at making a gigantic ecosystem." That's wonderful if you're in it and nowhere else, right? So
yeah. So one thing that's probably important to note there is we tend to think about this kind of like onboarding as if it's entirely about features of the platform, et cetera. Twitter had, they all got fired, but they had people who were concierges, who were business development folks, who were going out to celebrities, to political organizations, to political people, and saying, we'd like to see you on Twitter. What can we do to help you to connect with your audience? This is your concierge. They'll tell you how to tweet. They'll help you through it. So there was the platform provided an ecosystem for big folks, like big content creators. Same thing happens with YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera. There is a lot of support for content creators in those areas. We don't have that as much in the Fediverse. And that might be something that they can do that we can't do yet. And we might need to think about the social structures that would let us like have a, Fediverse concierge that's helping Oprah or Miley Cyrus like get onto the Fediverse and use it and be productive. Another thing that you mentioned is like having big collective spam protection, right? Because that's one of the best things to do for spam protection is that spammers are trying to send out 1 million emails. Well, if they get stopped at the 10th email because you reported it and the other, 10 million can't go through, that's awesome. So having that like collective, this might be a dangerous word, but herd immunity in terms of spam is really great, right? And again, that's something that we need to rethink in terms of a federated world. Honestly, like every time we talk about this, you asked about business opportunities. Like those are two right there. Like, doing the social media consulting for the Fediverse, doing spam protection for the Fediverse. There's a lot of things that people could build businesses around.
A couple of thoughts that occur to me, and looking also at the back channel, which is helpful. One is that because the GDPR got mentioned, I don't want to go deeply into this, but
oh, sure.
Most new laws protect yesterday from last Thursday, especially in tech, and you've got it for the next 50 years. What the GDPR protected 2015 from 2012, and now here we are thinking it should be the norm in 2023. But that's one thought about that. I think that and I'm bringing that up because I think the Fediverse is still under the radar legislatively. I mean, very few regulators are looking at that, saying, "How could we make that stop?" They're not doing that. So this is a good thing,
though. But so like you talk about, so less about, say, privacy regulation, more about antitrust regulation, right? So a lot of the European Union, in the US, they're looking at these big platforms and saying there's a big moat around these big platforms and no one else can participate. And one of the things that we do when we try to break up like big monoliths is insist that they implement open standards, and especially open protocols, so other players can get involved. Happened with telephones, letting long distance carriers onto AT&T's network, right? We see it all over the place. One of the things that the EU has been talking about is like, we would like to see social networking standards supported by these big social networking platforms. I don't work at Facebook. I'm not involved at Facebook at all. My guess is that some of that aspect is part of why Facebook, we actually haven't talked about this at all. Facebook has a product called Threads with 130 million users on it, and they are implementing ActivityPub and rolling it out in the near future, according to their announcements.
So I need us to hold our thoughts for when we have a break, because I want to go further into not just the Threads things, but the other things you're involved with that we need to get in before the end of the show. So we'll get to those right after this. Okay, so on the right to be forgotten, I wanted to mention that a German friend of mine said, he liked the GDPR. He says, how do we remember who we forgot? So that's always interesting. But I want to, oh God, where was it? There are too many thoughts. Well, I guess I want to go a little further into this, that the Fediverse is the actual social network. And I'm wondering to what degree, I mean, you mentioned that you have your family on this thing. And it's actually during this call that I thought, wait a minute, I should set up a server just for our family, because they're all on Facebook, and I could set up something and I said, hey, extended family, come here. One of the good things about Facebook, which is actually awful in another way, is that the threshold of setting up a group is so low and so easy. And to make it private is also real easy. you want to have a high school reunion or something like that, especially if you're among the elders that are the heavier Facebook users, it's a real easy thing to do. And then it's there. And I'm wondering if I'm thinking about what's the path toward which the Fediverse and one's casual participation in it as a muggle can become normative. I mean, when it becomes as easy to set up your own little Mastodon instance as it is to set up a Facebook group.
Yeah, I just love that example. Facebook groups are they are currently the gold standard, I would say, for setting up a community on the internet where people can communicate, share documents, share images, have conversations. We are not there yet with Mastodon. We're not there yet with the Fediverse, right? So typically, you either have to set up your own server, like a Mastodon server. We also have some group servers. So one of the big things that happened in the last year with the Fediverse was when Reddit, different organizations, when Reddit was having problems with its API clients, right? So they were changing the API client requirements. A lot of the users were like, we don't want to be here anymore. We want to set up our own systems. And they moved to the Fediverse, right? So they're using these group servers called Kbin or Lemmy that you can set up for doing those group conversations. So for someone who is looking for that group experience that you got from Facebook, I would kind of push them towards Lemmy and Kbin in that area, which is still on the Fediverse. You can connect through Mastodon. You can use your Mastodon account, things like that. But it is an opportunity. But I agree, there is some software work to do. There may be some protocol work for us to do to get to that level where you can just be like, hey, we're having a family reunion next month. Let's start organizing it, get the right people invited into this group. I definitely agree. We're still not there yet in terms of UI and in terms of software.
By the way, Lemmy is Lemmy and Kbin is Kbin. So just for people, do you have something there, Jonathan?
I'm struck by a thought. He's looking at me. I've got this real thoughtful look on my face.
Yeah, you do.
I wonder if IPv6 changes the game on this at all. So I just had this thought. Nobody wants to run their own server, right? Normal people don't want to run their own server. But when you get to the point to where IPv6 is rolled out, you can have a server in an app. And so I'm having this thought of, if you have a phone or desktop or whatever that supports IPv6, why can't you just roll up the entire server into an app experience, and let somebody just, download the app, type their name in, it'll go out and get a dynamic DNS address for them, and suddenly you've got a new Mastodon server sitting on IPv6 somewhere. I'm wondering whether some of these roadblocks are going to get solved through technology, particularly the IPv6 rollout.
Jonathan, why are you giving away these great business ideas? That's a highly valuable thing. Yeah. So I think that those either we have appliances in our home, right? So it's like a pre-built appliance that shows up, and you just plug it into your router, and it starts being your social server. Phones are a great device to use. Using dynamic DNS is another great part of that. I really think that this is an interesting aspect, because you can start also going into the other Internet of things around your home, right? So your cameras, you're turning your lights off and on, watching status stuff, having some control, using a open standard for both controlling and monitoring these devices. I've actually got a whole section of a chapter in my book, especially about having these small devices on the Fediverse.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. All right. Do we want to talk about these other two projects, WikiTravel and OpenEarth? We are almost out of time. Maybe give us the 30,000 foot view on the story about WikiTravel.
I'm going to pass on WikiTravel. We talked about it back in number 37. It's doing great. WikiTravel moved to the Wikimedia Foundation, the same nonprofit that runs Wikipedia, and it's thriving. It's got a lot of language support. There's so many articles. It's really one of the best places to look. If you love to travel, check out WikiVoyage. There's lots of great information there. The other project that I work on, which is my day job, is I work for an organization called the OpenEarth Foundation, openearth.org. We are a nonprofit that makes open source software to fight climate change. So this is my it's one of my passions. Well, two of my passions: open source software and the climate crisis. And we make different products that are participating in reducing emissions around the world. City Catalyst just came up. City Catalyst is a open source project that we just launched for cities that helps cities take stock of the greenhouse gas emissions that are happening inside their cities and start planning on how they're going to reduce those emissions. Cities are responsible for about 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions on our planet, so they're a really important part of the net zero solution. And we're really excited to have a open source product that they can use.
So I want us to take a quick break, and we'll get down to the closing part of the show. We can go down any number of different ways. So, but we're gonna. There's too much good stuff to talk about. We'll be back with that right after this. Okay, boy. There's on the back.
Look,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Doc,
go ahead. Give me a thought.
We've got our regularly scheduled meeting in 2038. It's coming up in 15 years. So we do this every 15 years. So when I come back on in 2038, we'll have a conversation about some of my other projects, and we'll go through those.
If
I was thinking,
still work in 2038.
If we
in the show notes, I have to point out that that an important link is back to episode 37. I'll have to listen to that. Also, I think the next time we have you back, both Jonathan and I need to wax our mustaches, so we're all in.
Thanks.
We're all in compliance. So you may have to grow a full goatee below there. So we look like brothers.
Can I ask a question while we're on?
Yeah.
Which is, we've talked a lot about how people can participate in the Fediverse. One thing that I'm not sure about, and maybe one of the two of you could say, is for people that are part of the TWiT community, I know TWiT Social is there. What does it take to sign up on TWiT Social? Can anyone sign up?
I will step in and answer that.
Our producer, Ant.
Yes, this is Ant in the studio. TWiT.social is our Fediverse here for TWiT. It is run by the chief TWiT, Mr. Leo Laporte. And it's as simple as going to twit.social and requesting access, and he himself will do all of the approvals.
Wow.
Just make sure you mention, that you heard about it here on one of the shows or something like that, because he tries to minimize the spammers and bots and so forth that come through. But yeah, this is his baby, and we have a lot of fun over there on twit.social, just talking about any and everything. So yeah, twit.social.
Well, this gets me to actually something that is part of the personal protocol or routine on journey.host, for example, where if I get a follow request of somebody who I don't know, have no idea who they are, I don't say yes. I don't let them follow me. And that's a kind of spam filtration. I mean, they need to say more than, Joe 413, or something like that wants to follow you. And I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing there either, because they're in there to begin with. Maybe they're already cleared something.
I usually try and check, do I know anyone? Does its name look familiar?
Yeah.
That gives me a sense of like, do I really want to be sharing important information with this person? No. So I have one account, Evan at cosocial.ca. That's my big public one, and that's open follow. So I let anyone follow that one. And then my personal account, which is on my family server, Evan at Prodromou.pub, is really for my family, close personal friends. I share our vacation photos. I share, pictures of what I have for dinner. That's more intimate. And I do take more care about who can follow me that way.
Yeah,
I'm going to hop in here because I've had some concerns about this, and sorry for interrupting you all. But,
no, please do.
But the whole privacy aspect of these social platforms, I have an account here on twit.social, and I locked it up. I could have left it public, with us being a broadcast and so forth, but I locked it down because I got to the point with all of my other social platforms, it was just too daggum much, and I didn't really want the stress. So I locked it down, and I have to go through and say, hey, yeah, I'll let you follow me because I don't want to deal with a lot of spamming and things like that. And right now, if someone goes to follow me, I'm in a bit of a pause on letting people in because, again, just trying to find that perfect balance of I want this to be my happy space. I also want to share some things. I also want to interact with some people here and there and just, again, just make it a happy space. And I think as public people in this broadcast space, we're expected to have everything just sort of wide open. And I think that's crap. We're humans too. And we still need to keep a clean head and a clean mental space. Okay, I'm getting off the mic. Bye.
I think that's such a powerful point, though, which is like we can't be on stage all the time. Yep. We're not always acting in our public persona. Sometimes we just need to connect with friends, family, colleagues, neighbors in a way that's more private, that makes more sense. And I think that's one of the things about having control of over your social systems is you get to set those levels yourself. Right? It's not up to Instagram to decide who you share with. It's up to you. And I think that's a nice part of having open source software and open protocols.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we're getting down to the end of this, two things. First of all, I don't want to wait until another 15 years or whatever it is to have you back. I'll have to have you back before that. But I'm wondering where you see social going in a literal sense, because I think what we called social networks really weren't. They were just another centralized thing where people could be social. But the fediverse maps a lot better to what our social networks actually look like. Even what Ant just shared with us is a perfect example of how that works. Everybody has their own little protocol based on, or a collection of protocols based on who they know, how they know them, where they are. There's a reason we don't walk down the street with a name badge on. Actually, I wanted to ask you about identity because you've been at the IW a few times, and the fact that IW is still going after since 2005, so that's 18 years. That will never be solved in a huge way. It's just not. It's going to be a problem forever, which is maybe a good thing. But where do you see this? Where do you see it going? What's the kind of progress you're looking for here?
So I'm going to give a couple. Here's my hot tips for sociality, say over the next couple of years. First of all, Threads joining the Fediverse is going to be huge, right? That is going to mean a huge number of new people coming. The world's biggest social networking company joining the Fediverse. I think that's going to turn a lot of heads towards the Fediverse. Organizations that haven't already been joining up are going to be like, we have a possibility to access all of Facebook's customers and provide content to them without Facebook getting involved. Awesome. This sounds great. So I think that is going to really kick off some huge growth in the Fediverse. That's my first one. My second one is that I think we are going to see more organizations from the real world providing social services to their natural audiences. So universities, MIT has a Mastodon server for MIT students. I think we're going to see more universities providing social networking services to their students, staff, and professors, companies providing social network service to their employees, and having more of this distribution that maps very cleanly onto real world organizations. So that's kind of the second one. The third one is, as we're talking about bringing more people on, there's going to be more software, more innovation, more different kinds of applications. One thing that I tell people when they're like, where can I make a change in the Fediverse? And I say, like, go look in Facebook and look down the main menu where it says dating, marketplace, groups, your photos, memories. Take every single one of those, and that's going to make a great Fediverse piece of software, possibly a Fediverse business. Famously, Jim Barksdale says there's two businesses, bundling and unbundling. We're really at the unbundling level, is like taking what you like out of these other networks and building open source software or open source businesses out of it.
All right, so I got to jump in and ask. We've talked a lot about making the Fediverse more mainstream, but on the other end of that spectrum, what is the weirdest or most unexpected thing that you have seen someone do with ActivityPub or the Fediverse?
I'm going to tell you one of my favorite things. So the Fediverse, a lot of the people there come from open source background. We've got a certain kind of humor that has a lot of wordplay that's involved, right? So, for example, for hashtags on the Fediverse, if you want to talk about mosses or lichen, you use the hashtag Mastodon, right? MOSSTODON, right? Or if you want to show pictures of flowers, you use bloom scrolling, like doom scrolling, you use the hashtag bloom scrolling. Well, I was like looking at this and looking at Mastodon, and then I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder what's on Astodon. ASSTODON. I was like, dare I just say what that means on the Fediverse is these adorable pictures of people's donkey farms
donkeys,
and mules, and it's all about donkeys. And it's one of these things where I was just like, I really like being part of this community because people thought of that joke. They figured out what to do with it, and they made something that was like really wholesome and amazing out of it. So it's a really fun part. I follow the hashtag now because it was a really surprising one, and I like that it turned out that way. There we go.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, for those watching, there is an Mastodon. Wow. Actually, it's one of those. Forgotten mammals, it's kind of a cross between a donkey and an elephant. Yeah. Well, we are actually beyond out of time at this point. So this is where we ask what your favorite text editor and scripting language are.
Wow.
I don't know if they asked that back in 2008, but they ask it now.
I'm gonna answer with my favorite text editor. I use VS Code all the time. I think it's an amazing editor. It's got a ton of extensions. It's got beautiful support for all kinds of development tools. I used to be an Emacs user. I've totally gone in with both feet on VS Code, and it's I won. That's great. And then for programming languages, probably my favorite is using Scheme, like GNU Guile or Gauche. But most of my work now is in JavaScript, which really feels great under my fingers. It feels very Lisp-like if you know how to make it work. Oh no!
Ant loves playing those.
There are no wrong answers, but
they come through so loud in my headphones. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Well, that is. Evan, it has been great having you on. Our back channel has been loving it. And I think our front channel, when it's out there, is that people are going to love it too. It's been really great. And we'll have to have you back sooner than later. So thanks a lot, man. This has been great.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let's get it before the turnover on Unix time. That's important.
Oh, that's a good one. So Jonathan, you say at least he didn't say Java. That's
at
good.
least he didn't say Java. Yeah, no, I kind of like JavaScript too. It's a fun language, but every once in a while we talk to somebody at the end of the show. They tell us Java, and it's like, man, I wish we didn't even do the interview.
Oh no,
what's wrong with
I haven't heard Java that often. I think I'm trying to think of it, but
it's been a while.
Yeah. It's hard to, it's interesting. I remember an interview that Howard Stern had with Conan O'Brien, where they talked about how they'd all interviewed thousands of guests, and they actually didn't remember many of them because you can't. It's thousands of guests. Yeah. This is one I'll remember for sure. This is a good one.
Yep. It has been a lot of fun.
Especially since it's happening. It's a happening thing right now, and it's moving.
It is. Something that struck me during the show is we're looking at a potential future where, the European governments could come along and say, hey, Facebook, Twitter, all these guys, you need to implement ActivityPub. Right, like that's a potential.
Right, like they did with USB-C,
right.
which
I
actually thought was a bad idea because if I'm a maker, I don't want to be told what to do. But you're right, they could do that. That's an interesting thought.
So that you do have kind of this libertarian idea that says, well, these companies, they're privately owned, they should be able to do whatever the heck they want to. And on the other side, you have this idea, well, but it is a good thing for consumers to have just one kind of plug. So there is kind of that same weighing of the options. And I kind of come to the same place as my libertarian bent. I think, well, these companies, they're run by people, and people should have the freedom to not use ActivityPub if they don't want to. But at the same time, man, that would shake up the internet if Twitter was forced to be on the fediverse, right? That would just be incredible.
That would be really interesting. And of course, you say, well, it's only in Europe because they're the only ones who are going to do that kind of thing, right? But then they'll have to do it everywhere else, just like we did with cookie notices, right?
Right.
Shoot, we have to do cookie notices.
Which, you bring up one of the worst things that Europe has done to the internet. Oh, I hate cookie notices.
Yeah. And the thing is, the law doesn't even require it. It doesn't. If you're not a bad actor, you don't even need to do that stuff. But it's like your lawyers will say, right, everybody does this. Everybody has to put the cookie notice in the front of their thing. It's like, I mean, it's almost for many sites. It's sort of like the, smoking will kill you thing you see on a cigarette pack, only it has to go on everything. It's like all of this might kill you. Yeah. So, but I'm really encouraged by how much is possible here and how alive it is and how forward it's going. And it's just super cool that Evan's been involved in this like all along, and is making it happen. He's not dropping out. That's cool shit. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to say that. The New Jersey showed up. They'll bleep it later.
No, it's cool. I'm very much a fan of ActivityPub. And, we talked about it in one of our roundtable shows back about a year ago, I think, when everything kind of went sideways with Twitter. And there was this very non-political kind of line that we took that, whether you like the new owner of Twitter or not, the fact that lots of people are talking about Mastodon and the fediverse is just a net win for everybody. So that's the beauty of open source, not just open source software, but like even open source information. Going back to the older definition of open source, it gives people freedom to choose, and that's the big thing that the fediverse brings. Is it gives people that other option if they don't want to buy into the Facebook ecosystem or the Twitter ecosystem, they can host their own. And the fact that it's out there for an option, it makes everybody better.
Yeah, that's. I'm laughing at the back channel as New Jersey showed up. Oh, geez.
Oh, goodness.
Okay, there's so much I could write there, but I'd rather say it here. Anyhow, this has been great. So, Jonathan, give us your plugs because we need to get out of here. So.
Okay, so the big thing that I will talk about is over at Hackaday. You can follow my work. The security column goes live just about every Friday. We took off for Thanksgiving, but we will be back this Friday. And that is all the news you need to know, and specifically the things that I found interesting in the security realm throughout the week. So hackaday.com on Friday morning. Look for that and follow me there.
Thanks a lot. And I'm keeping up with the tradition by actually not remembering who we have on next week this time. And I have so many windows laying on top of each other here.
Well, I tell you, some things never change.
No, I changed for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, I was almost on top of it. But this week,
Adam Jacob from System Initiative.
Oh, there we go, Adam Jacob. Oh, thanks so much, guys. Team Recall. Before I could get to it, that's great. So that'll be a good one. That's coming up next week, and we will see you then.
It's midweek, and you really want to know even more about the world of technology.
So you should check out Tech News Weekly, the show where we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news.
It's the biggest news. We talk with the people writing the stories that you're probably reading. We also talk between ourselves about the stories that are getting us even more excited about tech news this week.
So if you're excited, well, then join us. Head to twit.tv/TNW to subscribe.